For some context, this happened when my brother and I were young kids. Now, I can't really recall how old my brother and I were, but let's just say that maybe I most likely was probably 6 turning 7, and my brother was probably maybe around 3 or 4 at the time. This story, however, was something that did come up to me, but I didn't really know really much about it until I started having flashbacks about this. Now, this was sometime back before we had a fake tree, and we only had got a real Christmas tree once, mainly because we wanted to try something different with by getting a real Christmas tree. Now, at this little pine tree farm area that my parents and I went to get a Christmas tree, I will not say what it is because I don't know the name of the place, so I can't say the name as I don't remember what place it was, but it was a Christmas tree farm like area. My mom and dad and I, along with my brother, were all in winter outfits, and we were scrolling through the Christmas trees we see. I was looking at them, and some of them were too small, others were too big, and some were really bulky and not really that great. We were looking through and seeing if we could find at least a decent sized tree. Not too big that it won't fit in our house, not too little where it was all scrawny and weak, but just a decent size for a decent sized home. Now, keep in mind that I was a kid, so I don't remember too much of it, but I will get to what I do remember. We went deeper into the woods, or at least near where the pine trees were, and my dad saw a really decent tree, and we agreed it, so he started to saw it down. He didn't have a chainsaw or anything, he just got what seemed to be a handsaw and started to saw it down with my mom's help. Now, my brother and I were playing in the snow when all of a sudden my brother was staring at something. It was in the distance, and I thought my brother was not feeling good, or maybe he must have heard something. I looked at the distance to see what he was looking, and standing maybe 20 or 25 feet away was something black. Now, I thought at first it might have been a large man. Maybe he was just scrolling through the pine tree farm. But he didn't look like a man at all. He just ignored when my brother asked who he was. I thought he was gonna maybe turn it around and see what we just said to him, but he didn't. Something strange began to happen when I looked at it. It didn't even look like a man, it looked maybe 7 feet tall or something. I thought that maybe it could have been a bear, but I had no idea what it was. My mom noticed my brother and I and asked if we were okay, and we pointed out what that figure was. My mom and I couldn't really get a good look at it as it was behind some really thick trees, so it was barely able to see. We thought it could have been a bear, but we had no idea what it was as it took off ran the back away the way it came most likely. It let out a really weird noise that sounded like a roar. My brother and I were confused, but my mom told my dad about it, so we grabbed our Christmas tree and left the farm. When we got home, my parents didn't even know what it was, and they were discussing it on the way home. My brother and I didn't really say much in the car ride home. As soon as we got the Christmas tree we farm we got back home from, my brother and I were still in the daze of what it was. Still to this day, even though it's been a few years now, I still don't know what that creature was. I do know that it was definitely not a bear or any human being. It might have been some creature or whatever that thing was. We had never seen it again. For some context, this actually happened when I was maybe be 13 or 14 years old, and this took place in the winter, most likely in 2012. I don't really remember if it was when I was 13 or 14, but this was honestly something that I had no idea that it would happen. My grade 8 class was doing like what seemed to be a trail we were going on with snowshoes. Now, I've done snowshoeing in the past, and I mean, it was a pretty fun experience as a kid. When you get to adulthood, it's pretty interesting thing to do, especially during the winter. It was a decent, nice day, which means it was a decent day, and it wasn't too cold, and it wasn't too blustery or blizzardy. So my grade 8 teacher decided that we would all go snowshoeing in the woods. We all took our snowshoes and we put them on our feet, and this was sometime after their second lunch break, aka with recess. So we got our snowshoes on and with our snowsuits on, and we walked through what seemed to be a forested path. Now our road was pretty much snow covered, not entirely, but some slushy snow, while most of the place was covered in snow. We were strolling through the woods when we got there, which was across from the school. There were different routes that we could take, so we decided to take more deeper into the woods. As we were going more deeper into the woods, the further we got, we ended up looking up to see that there was some sort of sound. My class and I heard it, but we didn't see what it was, and we thought that maybe it might have been some other hikers, as there were other hikers around the area, so we decided to ignore it and continued. However, though, I noticed something was really odd. There was an odd shaking of the trees. I looked up and one of my friends noticed it and said they saw it too, and whatever it was going back and forth. At first, we thought that it might have been a bear, or it could have been a bear, but we had no idea about what it really was, as we realized that we saw a creature that was pretty large. We realized that it couldn't be a bear, and we thought that it might have been, but whatever it was seemed to be much larger than a bear. I didn't really get a good chance to look at it very closely, as it was way far away in the distance, so there was no way that I could see it. Whatever it was just stared at us for uncomfortably a long time, but then it took off into the woods. I still am confused on what that thing really was, as we know it wasn't a bear. It could have been a large man or something, or maybe some creature. This one honestly have us confused, and still are to this day. This happened to me when I was maybe 9 years old, and I was going to this one ranch that had a horse related back riding lessons. Well, it wasn't really lessons, but it was kind of like a horse camp. And this was my final year going there when I was 9, as the place was going to be shut down as a different company had bought the land for a certain amount of money. Now, the ranch I went to had certain cabins. A few cabins, one side for the girls, the others for the boys. Now, since I was 9 years old, I didn't have anyone to go with, but with some supervision eventually. There was other counselors that were willing to help me out, due to me being autistic. Now, one of the nights while I was there was really shooken me up to an extent. For one thing, the cabin that I was at was isolated from all the other cabins. It was the very first cabin been down the girls' side that you would see when you go up a certain hill and climb a certain amount of steps. Now, this cabin was pretty small. Not really too small where it's crammed up, but there were bunk beds, so I always get the top bunks wherever space I choose. I choose one near the door, so it wasn't really a big deal, but of course the other girls there chose their spots as well. I was sharing a bunk bed where my friend, which we'll call her Lindsay, was sleeping down the down part of the bunk bed. Lindsay was 10 years old and said that she had been to this ranch for day camp for a couple years now. and she said that it's really fun and she loved it. I said to her that I've been going there since I was maybe 6 or 5, and she said she'd been going there since she was 5, and she really enjoyed it. Now, I really thought that Lindsay was a good friend, and she and I unfortunately lost connection as we, the usual stuff, grow older, move on with our lives, and etc. But one of the nights while I was there, I think it might have been a Tuesday night, maybe it was a Wednesday night, Lindsay and I were the last ones to exit out of the bathroom and go up to our cabin. Shortly after we were asleep, I think it might have been around 1 in the morning or something, Lindsay ended up saying, whispering to me when she kind of poked me a bit when she climbed up the second bunk as I was on. She said that she heard some twigs and branches snapping around the cabin. I looked at her and I thought that maybe it was a bear around. But I know we don't really get bears in that area, but it was rare for them to appear. She even said that whatever it was she saw during the illumination of the moon, and plus with the lamp outside of the cabin, it revealed to be whatever it was black and furry. I thought it was a bear, but she said that it didn't look like a bear. It wasn't looking at her, but it was facing the other direction and didn't want to face its eyes or whatever it was. Now, I said to Lindsay that maybe it was a bear, or maybe it might have been someone trying to pull a prank. We stayed in our beds and not looked out any of the windows for a while. The twigs and branches snapping still got louder, followed by some guttering growls. We had a feeling that it might have been maybe a bear or something. We stayed quiet. Lindsay and I just decided to stare at the ceiling for a little while or stare at the other direction where the sleeping campers were. Then whatever it was took off and we had heard the twigs and branches snapping along with some leaves crushing, disappearing into the distance. The next morning, however, when Lindsay and I got up to go to the bathroom, which was at least at the bottom, the girls' bathroom was, we saw some big footprints out in the mud. Now, it had been raining a few days before, and we realized that those footprints didn't look like a bear, but it looked huge. I have no idea if this was a large person or whatever creature made them, but we still got a little frightened about this and we alerted the camp staff. But when the camp staff looked around the area, they said that they saw nothing, and they said no one was there. Now, just to keep this a reminder for people, this only happened sometime maybe a few years ago. I don't remember much about this story, but we'll just say that I was 17 or something, and at the time this was during the summer of 2016. Now, I don't remember much, but we'll just say that I was going on a hack after my riding lesson sometime in 2016. I know it might have been maybe sometime in August or maybe September. I don't remember. Now, I was with my friend, which we'll call her Vanessa, and we were on this little trail that we were taking. Now, we were both alone, so it wasn't really a big deal as we had gone there many times. I had some really strange and creepy encounters when it comes to me being on trails, on horses especially, but this one really caught my eye the most. We went further away from the property than we expected as we found another trail we thought we would give it a shot. Now, as we were going down, I looked over and maybe around at least 50 or so feet, I ended up realizing that there was a building in the distance. I realized that since it was foggy and realized that it was an old barn. It was very small, so it obviously wasn't any riding barn or anything. It looked like a small barn that it could be used to keep maybe at least very few animals, small ones. I was looking over there, but I noticed something black walking across the tree line. Now, I ended up thought that maybe it might have been a man, Whatever it was then started running off into the distance towards some trees that were on the left of us. Me and Vanessa were confused as to what it was, and on the way back, we realized that there was some large footprints that looked like they'd been left in mud maybe a few days ago or something. I had no idea what that was, but I had a feeling that it must have been Bigfoot or something like that. Me and Vanessa were still confused to this day on what we saw, and if that thing that ran across the field and near the tree line went to the next set of trees was the same one that made the footprint. That still confuses us to this day, and we haven't seen anything like that since.